So yeah, it's the first time I'm doing something like this. I just wanted to try to do a little bit of a Q&A. I put out a post on Reddit a couple weeks ago saying I was going to do this, and then another follow-up last week. I just wanted to try to go over some travel tips and some insights to the, you know, answer some questions for the community about what it takes to travel to a Grand Prix and just where to start. And it's interesting on some of the stuff that I get, trying to talk to some people and So yeah, where to start? I got a question from Rena on Reddit. So I've been trying to find a way for my partner and I to go to an F1 race together. My plan for 2025 was to buy tickets and plan a trip as a birthday present, but I got so lost. And so, two main starting points are what track do you want to visit? Is there a track you want to visit, or is there a specific country or host city? And then just start narrowing it down from there. From once you get that stuff answered, is when you start getting, your what it's going to take to get from wherever you are. Start to narrow down your budget and flight options. Is it going to take me 25 hours of flying to get there? Is it going to take me 10? Is it going to take me 3? That's when you just start narrowing stuff down. Also, the time of the year, the calendar goes throughout the year, so it's really dependent on how and when you can go to some of these places, because some places are extremely far from wherever you are, and so there's a lot of variables. But basically, easiest point is just start narrowing it down to say it's one of your favorite drivers' home races, like Silverstone with Lewis, or do you want to go to the Dutch Grand Prix in Zandvoort because next year's going to be the last one? There's a lot of different things you kind of got to start asking yourself before you start planning, if you're just kind of deciding on any race. And then that kind of leads into another question I got from my buddy Mike. What are some good races, good options for value travel? Just, it also depends where you're from. A lot of the cheaper races tend to be in Europe, like Budapest, Monza. You can get GA for like, I think 120 euros for a 3-day ticket. If you're in Asia, China is also really cheap. I had turn one for like 330 US. The thing is, it all depends on what it's going to take for you to get there and how or where you're going to stay. Are you staying in a hotel? Are you staying in an Airbnb? What are the valid options? And you always got to consider the ticket cost, because it's typically that ticket cost for the race and then ticket cost for your airfare, usually the most expensive. So it's something like, you can drive there, you can camp. That's going to be the cheapest way to go. But also, if you're camping, you got to think about the weather. There's kind of a lot of different variables. But if you want a cheaper race to go to, it tends to be, actually, I believe F1destinations.com has a pretty good article on on rankings on as far as dollar amount average, and they also break it out on budget type, where if you're going for the cheapest thing, or if you're going for mid-range, or if you want something like hospitality or paddle club. And so there's some pretty good resources out there, and I would definitely subscribe to the F1 Destinations email list, and they get some of the, they send out some of that stuff, and they also post it on all their socials. It works pretty well to be able to at least get some inspiration if you are looking to start somewhere. Next question I got from Mike was, how far in advance do you plan a race? So now that the 2026 calendar is out, it's like right when it came out, I think it was midnight Central Time, I was booking hotels because they instantly shoot up in price at some cities, or availability is gone. Sometimes hotels already block stuff out, like Montreal. It's kind of weird with that one. Or the teams get a heads up on the calendar, so they book out the Hilton for McLaren, or they do kind of on the back end things that we can't really see as public, but they sponsorship deals with hotels, or the F1 also coordinates a lot of the stuff for the teams and crews to be able to have places to stay. Because let's take Suzuka for example, it's really hard to stay in Suzuka proper. A lot of those hotels get booked up by the teams or sponsors, and it's not only the teams, but there's also all the catering companies that work for the event or work for the F1 Hospitality Experience Group. There's there's a lot of people that travel to work these events, and so those are typically the types of crews to get the first dibs on some places. So like for Suzuka, it's really hard to stay in Suzuka, but you can stay with most of the other crowd in Nagoya. Sorry, I deviated from the question. But how far in advance do you plan a race? typically when the calendar comes out, I start getting ideas because for me personally, I know what times of the year I can travel. It's usually easier to travel in the spring and the fall. In the summer, not so much. The summer races are, I live in Austin, and to get to Europe in the middle of summer is very expensive. Excuse me. And so it's hard for me to justify paying full price for a flight to go to Europe when I can do a little bit more on a budget earlier in the year or later in the year. It typically comes down to as soon as the calendar comes out, I start picking some races I want to try to go to, and also that's when you kind of circle back to the previous question: is what countries do I want to go to? What circuits do I want to go to? It kind of snowballs into other questions that you kind of need to ask yourself to help narrow down some of the decisions. And then also, what order do you book? Your travel plans and tickets, airfare, hotel. I typically do hotel first because that's usually what goes fastest. Whether I do hotel or Airbnb, I usually try to book something pretty much whenever the calendar's announced, because that's when, like I said earlier, that's when stuff starts going away, and you end up having to start making the decision is like, well, do I want to travel for 2 hours to to save $100 a night? And then things start adding up. But yeah, typically a place to stay is the cheapest thing, or the first thing, and then you start looking at, and also when you book a hotel, try to book something that you can cancel or change or get a refund if you have to put money down. That's offers the best flexibility. I always book hotels with I have status with Hilton, so I tend to stay at Hilton, and you don't always need to stay at the fanciest place, but something that's clean and easy. Just take a look at the reviews on Google Maps or TripAdvisor and things like that. Once you get the hotel booked, that's when you can start looking at airfare. And I follow some articles on like the Points Guy, and there's a lot of travel like websites. A lot of them circle back to just promoting credit card bonus offers, but there's some pretty good information out there, especially on when you go on some specific subreddits. On the sweet spot of booking flights is typically 6 to 9 months before. And so right around 9 months is when I start looking, and I typically use Google Flights and set alerts on some potential days. And when you set alerts, they start trending the prices, and you can kind of look at the graphs and data to figure out what is cheap for this route. It also helps you narrow down how long or what your connecting cities are. And another thing that I like to do is if I'm going to Asia, like Japan or China, I tend to set alerts for flights from my hometown, Austin, and also from the hub cities I would connect in. Like if I'm going to Japan, I can connect in LA or Seattle. Those are the most common. I tend to fly Delta and SkyTeam, so I try to connect in their hubs. Like Detroit also has a flight. I think Atlanta does too. But I typically set alerts for my hometown and also the connecting city, because oftentimes, like this year, I booked China and Japan from LA and Seattle because I was able to get those flights on points. It was like 50,000 points round trip. And then I just book a separate ticket to get to and from LA. And because I book a separate ticket on Delta, they're pretty good about honoring like if something were to happen. It also helps if you have status with them. But if something were to happen and your flight is delayed, they kind of put your itinerary together, or at least consider that. It's not completely like the rule. They can obviously do whatever they want because it's a separate ticket. But it helps if you have status, if you have to make a phone call to, change your flight or something like that. SkyTeam and Delta is pretty good with making the accommodations for stuff like that. And that's where I think I did round trip to China, Japan each for like $300 because I did points, then taxes from the hub city, and then I think I spent like $250 on a flight round trip from Austin to those cities. So there's some things that you can do to try to save some money on airfare. And then once you get your hotel, that's when you can start looking at the at race tickets. That's kind of dependent on the circuit, which I'll touch on that a little bit. But tickets, if I plan on going, I try to get tickets as soon as they go on sale directly from the promoter. But yeah, I'll touch on tickets again in a little bit. Another question I got was, do I need special visas for certain races or countries? And then general tips on finding fan experiences outside of a race, like the Williams Fan Zone, special events, pop-ups. So that's a kind of ambiguous question, but it really depends on your passport and your nationality. It can really vary. There's some stronger passports than others. The only races I've had to get visas for was China and Bahrain, I think. Bahrain is very easy. They actually have a special visa for traveling for Formula One. It can still be a bit picky on some nationalities. Like I think they're really picky on people from India. I think you have to actually upload a copy of your race ticket. And For me, I think I did upload my race ticket or at least the invoice, but it was a pretty quick process. I did it in advance just because I you never know if the gate agent boarding your flight is gonna they're unfamiliar with the process, or they just assume that they have specific criteria on their computer and the F1 visa is not on there. And so if you don't have a visa before boarding, sometimes I've seen people get denied flights. I've almost been denied a flight during COVID to Madrid. I was going to MotoGP in Valencia. And there's some strict rules and that were constantly changing. You had to have a COVID test. You needed to have certain things. And so it's always good to prep your visa ahead of time and don't specifically rely on doing a visa on arrival. If you can help streamline it, try to get a visa in advance. So like for China, I had to get a visa, which ended up being more than a flight. I think I had to spend 415 US to get a visa to get into China. I have an American passport, but it's good for 10 years. So now I can go to China as long as they allow us to visit. But it all depends on your nationality and what country you're visiting. I know some people are really hesitant to go to China because of what they do for work. And on the applications and stuff, you do have to answer quite a bit of questions. I believe Saudi Arabia as well. I know there's a lot of stuff happening here in the U.S. and it's pretty intimidating on what people are having to go through to get here from other countries to visit for F1. And so just take that stuff into consideration. You can typically find that stuff on I believe there's a Homeland Security website that you can find the information, but I'm sure your government, your embassy typically have a website with the information as well, as long as travel advisories. And as far as the fan zones and stuff like that, it's best to follow the teams on social medias. That's typically the best thing. Williams has a pretty good email list where you can find that stuff too. Another question I got from Patty on the Missed Apex Discord was, what software or system do I use for organizing trips? So I use this app called TripIt. It works really well. You do have to give it access to your email, but they have a free and a paid version. I use it kind of not a spam email, but it's an email I use for kind of generic everything. And so I give it access to that, and it works great. It actually pulls all your information from any kind of most flight confirmations. I think it just uses AI or some kind of keywords whenever you get a confirmation email, and then it imports it to the app TripIt, and it compiles it by date and city and everything. It makes it super easy to try to keep track of some of the stuff, because when I'm booking things like a year and a half advance, sometimes I forget, and it works great. But basically, it compiles a trip based off of city, and so if I book a flight, that's automatically imported. And then if I book a hotel and it detects it's in the same city, it usually just joins to that same trip. And then if I book, say, a restaurant reservation and it doesn't import, it's an easy way to add it manually to that trip within the app. Or if for some reason you book a hotel in Nice and it separates it from your Monaco booking, it's an easy way there's like an option to combine the activities into one event. And so it makes it really easy. I really recommend that app. It's called TripIt. I never got the paid version. I just use the free one. I honestly don't know what the difference is. I think you get some more alerts and things like that. But it's also a good way to keep track of where you've been. It keeps track of how many miles you flew in a year and stuff like that. It's pretty cool stats at the end of it. Kind of like that. It's like stats on Spotify and YouTube. Well, like how many, all that data. Another question. How do you find the urge to pack everything and be minimalist traveling? So I actually overpack quite a bit, and depending on the trip or where I'm staying, like if I'm staying at an Airbnb, so I typically travel with pillowcases just because you never really know. It's kind of, it also, I feel like helps me sleep, and little things like that when you're transitioning time are like 14 hours. I like to do pillowcases sometimes if I know I'm staying at an Airbnb that doesn't have many reviews. I also like to pack towels. I usually shower like 2 or 3 times a day, and so sometimes they only give you one towel per person, and so it varies, but I do tend to overpack. Another thing I do when I pack is if I am taking stuff like towels or an extreme number of socks, I use these vacuum packs that I got on Amazon, where it's like a giant Ziploc bag with a little USB pump that just it's like a food saver for your clothes, and it helps you save a bunch of space. But also, if I'm just going somewhere for a weekend, I'll just do carry on only and be fairly minimal. And I typically stay at a nicer hotel. I don't need to worry about pillowcases, at least for the most part. But yeah, you just kind of got to plan for your trip and try to pack what you need to make sure you can get some rest. And that's where pillowcases are a simple thing that help me out. Another question I got was tips on Monaco tickets that don't cost a fortune for a family of four. And do people resell on StubHub cheaper closer to the event? Well, two different things. Monaco, it could vary in cost quite a bit. There's cheaper ways to do it. For a family of four, I would honestly just recommend buying whatever grandstand that fits your budget. If you buy directly from the GP, Monaco-Grand Prix, I think is the website, you can pick your specific seat. That race doesn't sell out immediately. A lot of the best sections do sell pretty quick, but you can typically find tickets for that fairly easily. It usually takes a couple months before some of the better sections sell out. For a family of four, I would probably look into staying in Monaco or just across the border. In France, it's I don't know, depending on your walking abilities, it's all uphill. Like once you leave the circuit, that place it's amazing, but it's a lot of stairs. There's some public escalators, some elevators, and stuff that you can use to get around. Um, because if you have to travel between Nice and Monaco, the trains can get kind of crowded. But I know this year some friends that went, they did have a better experience with it. But you can save quite a bit by staying in Nice. I think I stayed at an Airbnb in Nice for like 100 or 120 euros a night. It's really not too bad. And I typically book a bigger place. For a family of four, I'm pretty sure you can find something around that price. And you can probably get, I think the train tickets, they're not very much. I believe they're like 12 euros a person for a return ticket. And do people resell on StubHub? Honestly, avoid StubHub, especially if you're not familiar with the way tickets work for large events. It's easier just to avoid it rather than deal with it, especially if you're traveling to another country or if you're traveling at all to an event like this. StubHub is just sketchy. And a lot of times you call or your tickets don't arrive on time. You call and they say, oh, they'll get there. Don't worry about it. And then it's morning of free practice and they still haven't gotten to your email. And then you have to call again and it's just starting the process over again. It's a race that uses PDF tickets and somebody photoshopped a child's ticket and sold it several times across different platforms. It happens all the time. I get a lot of people that message me saying they got scammed on StubHub and do I know where to find tickets? Just avoid StubHub. It's not worth it. It's not worth the hassle. You're not going to find a ticket for cheaper than buying direct from the promoter. If you do, it's very last minute and you can't plan around that, especially for a family of four. I've done that where I go somewhere by myself and I just find whatever I can find. But for a family of four, I feel like being spontaneous isn't probably the best idea. Yeah, it's hard enough planning for a group, let alone trying to be spontaneous like that. Unless you guys just kind of more casual and don't really care if you attend or not. There's different, concessions you can make. But I would just buy directly from the promoter. And I can touch on that a little bit too, is the way tickets work is the circuits sell tickets to the events. Formula One doesn't. Formula One sells hospitality. And so the best place to buy is always direct from the circuit or the circuit promoter. It's always going to be the cheapest. You can typically select your seat. Some races don't let you, but everything other than the circuit is a reseller as like a third party vendor, which there's plenty of valid ones out there. F1 is a good store, but they tend to mark up quite a bit because it's actually a different company. It's not F1 that sells the tickets on their website. It's a company based out of Monaco that owns a couple of different ticket companies. And so by selling on F1, they actually have like a double markup. I tend to use P1 Travel quite a bit. They're a really good company based out of the Netherlands. But I've talked to some of the employees that work there and they're great. They actually take part in the community answering questions on Reddit. Their markups tend to vary across the races. Some of them are cheaper. Some of them are a little more expensive, but they're legit. You're going to get your tickets. They're just consistent. And for a race like Melbourne or Brazil that sells out like instantly, or without having to mess with this lame dynamic pricing Ticketmaster does for Melbourne, it's often easiest just to go directly to a reseller. And P1 Travel, for example, had tickets for Melbourne for I think like a day early, and then they lasted for 2 to 3 days. Versus buying direct from Ticketmaster, they had dynamic pricing, and the tickets cost the same as P1. And so it can vary by race. It's also previous years where Suzuka didn't sell to foreigners. So I bought directly, or I bought from P1 Travel because I couldn't buy directly. Or there's some people that were able to buy through a VPN last year, but I didn't want to wake up at 4 a.m. to buy tickets. So I just went directly to P1 Travel. But now Suzuka, I think this year they allowed tickets to foreigners. So hopefully that's the case going forward, and you can buy directly from Suzuka because you'll save like, I think I overspent by like 100 US buying ticket at B2 from P1, but that's kind of paying the convenience fee at that point. After that, the other options of buying tickets are from like peer-to-peer sites like StubHub. Just avoid that. StubHub, Viagogo are the same company. They're constantly just, it's a mess. Don't deal with it. And then it's always best to avoid buying from strangers on the internet. I get people who constantly message me saying they got scammed, especially around Montreal. Montreal, there's so many people that scam on the platforms like on GrandPrixTravel. I had to ban like 5 or 6 people last month just because it's a headache to deal with. But just avoid buying from people online and try to buy directly from the promoter. If you can't buy from the promoter, take a look at the sub wiki, which I'll link it in the YouTube video, but it's on the subreddit with a list of all the circuit promoters as well as community verified vendors like P1 Travel, F1 Ticket Store, Go Tickets. F1 Destinations is probably my second go-to. I pretty much buy from F1 Destinations or P1 Travel if I can't get from the promoter. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on tickets a little bit. And I got another question about buying tickets from Montreal. That's where GPCanada.ca is directly from the promoter. They're the ones who sell the tickets. F1 Experiences sells hospitality tickets, but the tickets they get for the event are actually from GP Canada, and then they mark up their cost, and then they add the extra stuff like the off-track events or the pit walks and hospitality stuff. So their tickets are going to be more expensive regardless, but you're really paying for the extras or the hospitalities or the track tours on the back of the flatbed and stuff like that. For Montreal, it can vary on the experiences. I would try to buy directly from GP Canada. They do have their they're like terrace. It's not really hospitality, but it's kind of like a place to get drinks and food, but you also have track views, but you're kind of more at the ground level, so it's harder to see. But Montreal does sell out really fast, and so that's one where it's kind of hard to get directly from the promoter, especially for the busier grandstands at turn 1 area, like grandstand 12 or 11. Excuse me. And another question I got was from Daniel on Instagram. He's from Detroit, been to F1 in my whole life, and thanks to my dad. He's retiring this month, and something what we always wanted to do was see the cars go around Monaco. Obviously, the Monaco GP weekend is insane and probably not feasible at this point in life, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on attending either Formula E or the historic GP. So there's definitely other ways to experience going to these circuits that aren't F1, and so you can save quite a bit going to see, like MotoGP at Coda. Tickets like $80 compared to $500 for F1 general admission. If you just want to kind of experience and see the circuit and see some cars on track, definitely check out the circuit calendars, and who knows, it could line up with another trip you have planned. But the historic GP would be awesome because that seeing the circuit, seeing Monaco shut down for the circuit is just wild in itself, and there'll be less crowds, probably easier to get around. The historic cars just sound amazing, and I can't imagine what they sound like in Monaco. They're probably extremely loud, and probably hear it all over the place, no matter where you are. But Formula E is also another good way because it's solid racing at Monaco. you'll see quite a bit. And I believe the circuit sells their tickets straight on same website. It'd be Monaco-Grand Prix. They sell the tickets for Formula E and Historic GP. But yeah, that would be probably the most ideal thing. Sorry, I'm just getting to some of the comments. Been kind of going off on. Yeah, sorry. This is first time I do something like this, so it's just kind of overwhelming with the people watching and joining and stuff. It's really cool to see. Another thing I wanted to touch on was it's not really a question, but traveling solo to a race, how to be careful and things to do is join a group chat. I have one that, well, I created a Discord for the subreddit. It's fairly active, but there's plenty of others out there. It seems like, I think F1 Destinations has a Facebook group for every Grand Prix on the calendar. But if you join the Discord, you can talk to other people who are also traveling solo. There's typically people for every race that travel by themselves. And so it's not so much of like having to meet people. It's pretty much if something were to go wrong or you need some help, you have somebody nearby, somebody who is kind of within an arm's reach, quote unquote. But it's also fun to just meet people and you already have something in common. So the icebreaker's there. And typically people who travel solo to F1 tend to kind of have that mindset of being able to take care of themselves. And so you kind of don't really need to worry too much about, if you show up to a meetup, either you vibe or you don't need to be part of the entire weekend with this person or people. You can kind of free to come and go as you want. But who knows, you might meet some people and have a good time and then you're hanging out every night. So I typically host meetups at most of the races I go to, sometimes at the track, sometimes at the host city, like at Zandvoort. I'll probably organize something at one of the beach bars again, probably after qualifying. So if anybody's around for that one, feel free to follow me on socials and swing by. But the meetups are pretty fun. It's a good way to kind of, not just talk about F1, but I've made some pretty good friends over the years where we hang out and peer pressure into traveling to multiple races a year that we weren't planning on attending. Traveling solo, there's a few things you can do. Obviously don't drink too much. If you do drink, make sure you eat and plan to have whatever you need. Like carry water with you. I usually carry snacks too. I also share locations with either just on my phone on WhatsApp or with an Apple AirTag with some family or a partner. Just a good thing to do, especially if the time zone is completely different. But basically, another thing Trip lets you do is export your whole itinerary to somebody without your confirmation numbers. And so if you just want to let somebody know, hey, I'm traveling by myself. This is where I'll be on these days if I don't check in, or if I don't respond, this is where I'll be or I'm supposed to be. And so it's a good way to let family keep track of where you are or what you're doing. But for solo travel, I typically use Google Maps and kind of come up with a rough plan or rough idea. But yeah, solo travel, there's a few different things you could do to try to help share your itinerary, share your location and things like that. But just kind of keep your wits about and just make sure you're aware of what's going on. It helps to have a good plan on how you're getting to, between your hotel and your race, who you're hanging out with and things to do in between. I also typically start to share I save restaurants on Google Maps or things to do, places I want to check out, like museums or any other events, like things going around the cities and things like that. My other friend, Mike again asked, I've been to a lot of GPs. What's in my bag? I tend to travel with snacks, water, sunscreen, and earplugs. Earplugs, you never know if you're going to need or not. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Typically, if you do need them, it's usually for the support races. Also sunglasses. A hat, because they're always expensive at the races. But yeah, there's a few different things I typically travel with, but snacks and water are usually the best thing. Some events don't let you take food in, but there's you can also always just kind of bury stuff or have a little decoy at the top of your bag. So yeah, I mentioned Mike a couple times. If you are planning on going to the Vegas GP, follow him on Instagram at mike.zoom.zoom. He's everything Vegas GP. That dude knows it all. He knows how the promotion's going on. His Instagram videos are really informative. He's also part of the Discord group. But yeah, that dude's great. He knows a lot about the Vegas GP and any kind of promos going on. Yeah, I think that's about it. I think I'm gonna wrap it up. But if there's any other questions you guys have, feel free to reach out. You can follow me, obviously, Adam@Adam.GrandPrixTravel on Instagram. And I just started the YouTube channel. I'll probably edit the video a bit, and this will live on Instagram. I'll link this on the subreddit. And yeah, it's been interesting. So sorry for the little delays. I'm working on like 3 different computers, and it's the first time. So yeah, I'll see you guys soon.